Hey guys, Mustached. I'm here to review the movie Disclosure Day. Now, I've not seen the trailers for this movie all too often. In fact, the only reason I know this movie even exists is that I saw certain individuals beginning to review it, saying that this is not necessarily a good film, per se. And I could see why someone would reach that conclusion. But let me draw my own conclusion first, and then proceed with the events that happen in the movie. What I will say is that if you're expecting either a more action-oriented movie or a more horror, sort of centric movie, I don't think you're going to quite get the latter half as much as you were likely expecting. Maybe you might get a little bit of the first half, but the action is definitely in the subpar category-ish, around that area. And so, what I will say about this movie is I could definitely see why this movie might get what it gets in terms of, its context. But I digress in saying that I think this movie could use from a bit more push and pull, considering. Now, this is directed by Steven Spielberg, who once upon a time, I believe he's the very same guy who gave us E.T. way back in the day. So he's bringing back the kind alien, the good alien, the one that comes in peace. But there is a lot more human interaction throughout most of this movie, and I do think that is a bit of the hurt that I think that does come through, wanting to get a little bit more of that E.T. vibe rather than this. But I digress. And so, what happens in this Disclosure Day? Well, the movie starts off with a bit of a heist going on, following one Daniel, and who has brought on his partner Jane, or he's trying to recapture her, or save her, as well as grab all of these top secret files and gained access to them via our antagonist throughout the movie. Our antagonists are generic FBI group, I guess. This is the best way of putting it. So that's what I will refer to them as, the generic bad FBI. But I digress in saying that we also cut to another group of individuals. A wife who ends up being this reporter who abruptly starts speaking Russian all of a sudden, and her husband. And I think one of the things that is a little bit, I suppose, getting us through this plot, is that we spend a great deal of time with the two humans that are, I'll say, inflicted by this alien, ability. We spend a great deal of time with them being separated. And again, I can't help but feel as if what they should have did instead is, and maybe this would have cost more money, but have us following an alien, and then one human instead of two humans. But anyway, so our reporter makes her way back into the newscast room with her new abilities sort of clicking in, as it were, able to deal with a cop relatively quickly, or as quickly as one can conceive. She is brought in, and we get what I assume is in the trailer. Again, I haven't seen it, but I would assume this would be in the trailer, where she like starts communicating in that language, that alien language. But she is brought, when she collapses, she's brought into a hospital for a scan. Meanwhile, Daniel is getting his own senses sort of toyed with in different ways. They gain different abilities from one another. However, the reporter lady sees that the FBI, bad FBI guys, are on their tail. And all that while, they're trying to escape. All that while, we're also sort of simultaneously following Daniel and his partner Jane. And he updates her about what he was doing at the beginning of the movie, showing her the files of the alien life forms, and it becomes a conflict about whether to, as the title suggests, disclose this information or to keep it secret. And a lot of this focuses on religion. That religious people would lose their faith, even though, in 2026, I don't know how many people are still religious these days, but I know that religion has spread / also decreased to an extent, I would argue, probably. But anyway. So they get contacted by one Hugo, who is their sort of intermediary to help them meet up with one another, as well as one of the ex-FBI people who are on their side. But more strangeties happen, like Daniel creating a crop circle and him witnessing it. He projects... the bad FBI guy uses this sort of technology to take control, as it were, over Jane. And now she knows she can't be trusted in that form. But Daniel manages to get back to her, despite all that, and they flee the scene. Or at least he gets her to, via getting her the files and whatnot. Even though he was just told not to trust her because of this whole ability to absorb into humans. It's a little bit of a plot hole, I suppose, that shift abruptly just happens. But the reporter has these powerful illusionary ability to... I don't even know if it's actually illusionary. Well, it is, and it goes beyond that, if anything. Where she can call upon a person's memory, I think, is like what this is alluding to in terms of like a power. and like making sure that these people are able to move out of the way. We learn through Hugo and a little bit more exposition that these aliens, they are in big love with the empathy, which is probably why they were given this ability to use memory as a way of like quick empathy. Like if you can core back to somebody's, desire through a memory, then yada yada yada. So that's how that works, I guess, in this context. But she is torn, that being Jane, about this whole information, and she makes contact with these other religious ladies, who they mentioned some the writing like directly addresses some text in the Bible about like how heaven is or like how we interpret at least a passage of the Bible about being, we have a great deal of respect for Earth, but since the Bible never mentions anything about space, that leaves space up into interpretation. At least that's what the lady retorts back with. Something akin to this, anyway. So, anyways, both reporter and Daniel meet relatively late in this context, around this part of the movie, and they need to go back to where it all began, where we see a flashback when they're together, and one of them holding the MacGuffin crystal. This MacGuffin crystal, indeed, to hold them back into the memory that they were initially gifted these abilities. And thus, when they recall everything they needed to recall, they are even more deeply entrenched in wanting to, as the title once again suggests, to disclose this information to the rest of the world. And so they make their way back into the news station, where, again, she uses her ability to get everyone on board relatively quickly, and the bad guys are trying to play catch-up, and they almost win by cutting off the power, but the MacGuffin is used the third time to re-bring back on the power. Thus, they are able to broadcast and show and disclose all of the withheld information by the government all throughout the world. And then, as the movie ends, we get told by the reporter that there's something else. And then that is the end of the movie. After the fact of the alien being brought out to the two of them, both the reporter and Danielle. And so, yeah, I think this movie is a heavily optimistic view about how people would interact with the idea of aliens, and bringing back the idea, even the concept of good aliens, back to the forefront of this context. I think what this movie should have done to fix two problems that I think are going to be withheld to the context of the movie is, again, the sort of back and forth about the disclosure argument is heavily one-sided, and I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. though they attempt to make the argument in the context of the movie. So all I'm saying is, like, why not then push that argument a little bit further? If that is the case you're trying to make, then it seems as if we are presented with the other side of, like, keep it disclosed and all that stuff. Like, that idea is presented in this movie, and it's swept under the rug in, like, what feels like moments. And again, I think one way you could fix this is by shifting. I would. Here's what I would do if I were directing this movie, right? Is you change the character of Daniel, and because the reporter, as she operates, like, her getting that information out there is the point of the film, right? Disclosure Day. So I think it would be a safer option to sort of shift one of the other characters that aren't as vital, but still rather vital to the context of this movie, to give it more of a oomph at the beginning of the movie. And how I would do that is by making Daniel an alien. And instead of the ability where he can do all this math stuff and all that stuff, they as Daniel, can temporarily disguise themselves as human, but eventually must keep going back to the alien form. And I think having the two meet up significantly sooner, the alien, in this context of me rewriting this movie, having Daniel the alien meet her way sooner in the movie, she can now be the character in terms of, like, a rewrite where she feels like disclosing this information at first feels like a really bad idea. Now that idea or context falls a lot heavier on Jane, and I feel like that's one of the problems with this movie, is that one of the, Jane feels like an almost side character to the movie, so I feel like combining the reporter with Jane to make that one unified character would help the script significantly. So by having one character, Jane, who I'll just call Jane the reporter, having her start off as a character who's, like, already doing the news, that maybe that's how we start the movie instead, with her doing the news, and she's living her daily life, and then, the snap, something, maybe it's Daniel the alien, his arrival, maybe that is what unlocks her ability, but she is, again, in combination with the Jane aspect, maybe she's more keen on being like, oh, I shouldn't, relent this information so easily, and thus it comes to her meeting Daniel, the alien, who can transform into a human at certain points. When they do so, they can now commune in a more, distinct shared language of English. And now we can have a more direct line between the alien, being the kind alien, wanting to share this information, wanting to open this world up to this level of information, and having Jane, the reporter, be someone who has to be won over by these ideals. And maybe we can even keep the religious aspect of her character. Just, again, roll that into one character. She uses faith as her sort of blocking mechanism, her main blocking mechanism, if anything. And, now Daniel has a harder understanding, being from space, about what mayhaps what God very well may be, and maybe he can bring his own insights to what what a god of aliens could even be. Again, there's so much more potential, I feel like, in sort of rebrandishing these characters in a more cohesive way, a more uniform way, because I do feel like this movie's a bit overclustered with characters. We're following three groups technically, and it definitely feels like certain characters don't play as much of a heavy role. Like Jane's whole role is to be her only aspect is to be the voice of, we shouldn't do this at first. And again, I feel like that could be so much more interesting if that was shared between what should have been the main character. Because she doesn't feel like a main character. She gets, like, sidelined at the end of the movie for the reporter. So, by combining Jane and the reporter into one character, you now remove that clunk that this movie, I feel, definitely has in terms of scripting. Over clunk and over character, sort of separation. It just tidying up the characters into more of a cohesive, telling of two tales, really. A character, again, that is wanting to disclose the information, and one character that is not, and then you have your antagonists that are trying to follow them throughout the movie, and that's all you would need. You can remove Jane as a character, and then you could also remove the reporter's husband, because he's utterly useless in this movie as well. Even more useless than Jane is. He's just there he's almost there to slow down the plot, if anything. So it's so like, you didn't need that type of character. Or again, by combining him with maybe Daniel the alien, that I think would tighten up the script in terms of, like, how we handle moving forward. Hugo, in terms of, like, importance, he's there more so to get the two together. That's his entire facilitation, is to find a way to get them together. And I feel like you don't really need a character for that. But, just having the characters, maybe through their abilities, finding one another. And that way you could probably also remove Hugo from the script as well, if anything. Because I do think he's a little bit of that extra bloat. He's a bit of that extra exposition as well. That I feel it could be more easily, integrated into the plot by just allowing these characters to substantially meet significantly sooner inside the plot, because that's his entire point, to get them together. And then you really don't need him for anything else, so you can, again, remove him from the entire story. He doesn't add anything else except exposition about what the aliens are there for. But now you could just have Daniel the alien. He can take up that role too. Do you see? Like, there are so many extra characters, and I feel like that is the problem with Disclosure Day. As this movie is, I don't mind the optimism in this movie. I just think that how we got there was a little bit, like, overfilled with, unneeded characters. So I would give this movie, like, a 6 out of 10 in terms of a score. And, again, that tightening up of the script would have definitely, I think, would have significantly helped out with sort of the both back and forth, and what can you do with the interactions between the good guys and the bad guys, and the back and forth of the Disclosure Day event as it is. And yeah, so it's an okay movie, I would argue, but I could definitely argue to see how it could be substantially better. Like, this is almost dropping to like a 5 meh out of 10 type of movie. That is where we are with this review. But I digress in saying that is my review of Disclosure Day. If you ended up enjoying this review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, make sure to check out those links in the description. One, head to my petition to help out small YouTubers. Second, to my PayPal. You can help support me and my channel directly. And third, to my Discord server. You can join Collab Shield, do that cool stuff for free. And until next time, everyone, bye-bye.